Good morning, everyone. Today's festive day. Hey, it's Cody's birthday. And Cody, I just want you to know I'm glad you were born. Happy birthday to Cody this morning. April and May seem to be busy birthday months, and I know I haven't plotting for everybody whose birthday it was to wish them, but thought I'd better mention that about Cody this morning. For those who use their ramp, I've been working on trying to get it leveled out and fixed up. I apologize that the rain again has caused more issues. Just keep me updated on how you're finding it. I'll keep working on the ramp over the next few weeks. See if we can get that leveled out for you. But let me know if you find troubles, and we'll get it. Our reading this morning is from Galatians 5, chapter 5, verses 13 to 15. Galatians 5, verses 13 to 15. You, my brothers and sisters, were called to be free, but do not use your freedom to indulge in the flesh. Rather serve one another humbly in love. For the entire lot is fulfilled in keeping this one command: love your neighbor as yourself. If you bite and devour each other, watch out, or you too will be destroyed by each other. I'll turn the time over to Ben Cody.
Well, I had a fight, but something went wrong, so look at that ugly picture. New computer, figuring out the formatting, all that fun stuff.
Oh, good morning.
And thank you for all the birthday wishes. Really kind of staggering. I don't feel like a 30-year-old man. 35-year-old man. I mean, life must have just stopped when I got married. I still feel like I'm around 28.
When I got married, so maybe, life would be going perfect when I met my wife, and I'm stuck there.
Nothing. 400 cents to you, boy.
Probably Amanda. So that'd be a really nice person now. I already got it.
You know what? Especially last year, around the time in particular, when the whole COVID situation started, and since then, I hear a lot of talk about freedom, especially in the States when I'm there, means like and stuff for me. We're in Canada as well, there were things like the freedom convoy, and whether you like that or not, there was all sorts of talk about, what about our freedom? What about our freedom to not do work, and our freedom to do work, and to choose and do what we want to do? And freedom for I'm grateful for it. If you guys can come here and I can work with you without fear, persecution, what's this? For the committee, for the work is. I think maybe we think about freedom the wrong way. We've been looking at Galatians, and Paul has talked a lot about this freedom versus law, slavery, spirit, and all this stuff. And we're about to enter into a section where Paul really talks about what it means to be free. And I think as followers of Jesus, we have maybe gotten caught up in the world's way of thinking about freedom. Like the freedom to do whatever I want, or the freedom to be my own man, or to not be told what to do. But Paul is going to talk about what freedom in Christ really looks like. And I think we should maybe start to try and shift our thinking to think about freedom in a more biblical, Christ-focused way. So that's where we're going. Paul has just finished in Galatians 15, up to verse 12. He's just finished a section addressing the idea that the Galatians needed to be circumcised to be part of God's people. He argued that doing so would actually enslave the Galatians to the law, that they would be required to obey it all, not just part of it. And Paul does not take this lightly. We've seen through the last 5 chapters, he gets really worked up about this. Because he even goes so far at the end of verse 12 in chapter 5 as to say he wishes the people teaching this would just go castrate themselves. He is harsh. And he says, guys, you are free. Don't go back to that. You are free from those requirements, all those rules, those regulations, and you relate to God through grace. But now it seems like he has discovered potential for another kind of problem. Taking freedom the wrong way or taking it too far. He says, freedom from the law does not mean lawlessness. Freedom is not a license to do whatever you want. This reminds me of Romans chapter 6, verses 1-2, where he says, what should we say then? Should we continue in sin so that grace may multiply? Absolutely not. How can we who died to sin still live in it? Paul was talking about grace in that section and it seems that people have started to think about it in the wrong way. If grace was really unlimited, like Paul says, then I can do what I want. I can sin all I want. It's covered. It's fine. I'm free. I'm forgiven. I can do what I want. And Paul says, no way. And so take that and jump back here into Galatians. I think it's a similar error in thinking. He knows how people tend to think. He knows that there's this temptation upon hearing that, you are completely free from the obligation to law, to then maybe go a little bit crazy and go in the other direction with your freedom. It might be a poor analogy, but it's kind of like when someone turns 18 and they're an adult and they have all this new freedom, or 19 and they're free to drink, and you see them go a little bit wild and they go a little too far. Paul says, this is not how freedom works. Freedom actually brings its own obligation. The obligation to use freedom in the proper way. He says this is not to be used as an opportunity for the flesh. Flesh throughout Scripture, and in particular here, really means an individual person in their sin apart from the grace of God and all the desires that go with that. This flesh, giving into the flesh, means embracing your desires of your body and mind, of all kinds. We see it in Ephesians 2:3 used that way, and a little farther along we'll see it used that way in Galatians. He's like, freedom is not to be used as an opportunity to give in to the flesh. And he said it's not for an opportunity for the flesh. The word there for opportunity is kind of a cool one. It's actually used in the military sense quite often. And we know Paul likes to use his military words. It's used in that sense to sort of represent a base of operations. So the imagery here where he says an opportunity for the flesh is that flesh is sort of occupying sin, that is occupying this position of an opponent. And it is using freedom as a springboard for these destructive activities, for sin. And that's the imagery he's using here. And he says, freedom is not meant to be used that way. Don't use freedom as an excuse to sin, to put it simply. He says the proper use of freedom is to be servants of one another through love. And this is that word we mentioned last week, agape, again. A relatively rare word in the Greek, but used hundreds of times in the New Testament. It is goodwill, benevolent. It's a need-meeting, self-forgetting kind of love or service. And it is used often as a love between Christians, as well as a love between God and his followers. And so freedom is used to serve others out of this kind of need-meeting, benevolent love. And he says, serve each other through love. And the word there is really serve as praise. You know, Christian freedom is not in the Greek sense at the time of a man being the master of all his own decisions, but it is in terms of the human capacity for serving each other through love. Submitting yourself, lowering yourself, almost becoming a slave to your brother and sister, to serve them, to help them, serve them as slaves of love. As those that Christ has set free, his followers should not lapse back into the slavery of legalism. But neither should we abuse the freedom. Instead, we should realize the true nature and implications of Christian freedom. You could almost sum up his argument through Galatians at this point by saying, all these moral rules, apart from grace, become self-centered and legalistic. But grace without this moral action, without service, without love, is just empty. It says you are free, but you are free to do what Christ wants. You are not free to sin, but free from sin. You are not free to be self-absorbed, but to be focused on others. And then he goes on to say, to elaborate on this even more, and says, you'll love your neighbor as yourself. The whole law is fulfilled in this one statement. The whole law really means the spirit and the intention of the law is this. And it can be summed up or fulfilled in a single command. And he quotes Leviticus 19, verse 18. Love your neighbor as yourself. I'm sure we all know he's also quoting Jesus, who says that as well. And, you'll hear some wild sermons out there that sort of twist it and say, oh, the primary meaning is that we need to properly love ourselves before we can love other people. And, that might be true, but that is not the meaning here. We are to love our neighbor with the same spontaneity and cheerfulness as we love ourselves. We often give ourselves priority. We save the best things for ourselves when we're giving things away. We keep the nicest clothes for ourselves. We keep the best food for ourselves. We place ourselves first. He's saying, flip that. Love your neighbor that way. Put them first. Give them the best of your time, the best of your service, the best of whatever it is you have to offer. And you might be asking a similar question to the Jewish man in the book of Luke. Who is my neighbor? Luke 10:29. And this leads into Jesus sharing the story of the Good Samaritan. And most of us, if not all of us, know that story. Samaritans and Jews, they are enemies. They hate each other. And this Jewish man gets beaten by robbers and left for dead. And his fellow countrymen walk by him on the road and don't come to him. But a Samaritan, who is by all accounts one of his worst enemies, comes and helps him, saves him. The point of the story that Jesus tells is that your neighbor is not just your friend or your brother or your sister or someone you like. ultimately is anyone who may cross your path in life, including your enemy. Jesus made everyone our neighbor, right? And we are to love our neighbor as ourselves. We are to love everyone as ourselves. And when you really stop to think about it, that is a heavy command. Like there are some people out there in politics or in other countries in wars and things, and I don't feel particularly loving towards them. But Jesus and now Paul say, you're supposed to love them. That's hard. We serve. We tell them about Jesus. We show them Jesus. But we don't fight them. We don't get angry at them. We don't hate them. When you really think about it and look at our world today, this is probably one of the hardest commands. We think of it as not that, we take it for granted. Oh, Jesus loves your neighbor. That's not so hard. I'll treat this person nice. But when you go beyond your actual neighborhood or beyond the people you know, it gets hard. We are not to determine our attitude towards someone by first deciding if they qualify as a neighbor, because guess what? They do. And instead, we are supposed to endeavor to be a neighbor to everyone that we encounter. Help them, show them kindness, serve them, meet their needs, even if you just think they're the most despicable person out there. And so Paul says, he condenses the law, particularly the 10 Commandments, into one statement. And this, when I read this, I had some questions. I was like, well, Jesus said it's summed up in these 2 commands. And now Paul's just saying one. What's going on here? Jesus says, love the Lord your God and love your neighbor as yourself. Paul says it's all summed up in love your neighbor as yourself. So what's going on here? Well, loving your neighbor as yourself is only possible when you are already loving God with your whole being. And it is a concrete expression of your love for God. So the two are intimately related. And Paul does not need to say both. The people should know you got to love God to love your neighbor. And if you love God, you're going to love your neighbor. Paul has said to enjoy freedom and to not relapse into legal servitude. And now he is telling people to serve each other through love, and by doing so, satisfy the requirements of the law. Does that sound a little paradoxical to you? You're free, but now you got to serve. Christ set us free from bondage to the law. We're no longer obligated to keep the commands, the little itty bitty rules about tithing mint and this and that go on. But God's law does remain a valid expression of his will. We can see a bit of his heart and what he desires, and it requires us to love our neighbor. And so what Paul says is everything the law requires. The law shows us a bit of God's heart, his will, and ultimately it is all summed up, all fulfilled and satisfied when you just serve each other through love. So it's like Paul is saying, you want a law so bad, you want to go back to the law? Well, here's a law for you. Love your neighbor as yourself. That's all the law you need. And it is both at times easier and at times harder. And then he goes on to say and talk about stop biting and devouring each other. They're arguing. We don't really know the details, but we have some idea. It's popularly thought that the Judaizers or these false teachers who came in, their teaching has somehow caused some form of argument or controversy in the church. People are divided over it. Some are saying, yeah, we should observe the law, we should get circumcised. And others are with Paul saying, no, no, we're free. We don't have to do that. I don't want to get circumcised. And there seems to be some quarrel there. And this might be the particular working of the flesh that the Galatians are struggling with right now. And Paul says, being at each other's throats does not help anyone. I mean, think about it in your own life. Has arguing with someone ever actually made the situation better? In my experience, if I lose the argument, that's actually usually the best outcome. Because if I win the argument, I've usually made an enemy or made someone really angry or upset or hurt their feelings. And I have never seen someone argued into the kingdom of heaven. What is the point? If it comes down to you feel like you're being wronged, Paul elsewhere says, why not just be wrong? Arguing, he says, is not good. Being each other's throats does not help anybody. You're attacking each other like a pack of wild animals. It is the opposite of serving each other through love, and it leads to mutual destruction. I am so happy that in the time I have been at our congregation, I have not seen this biting and devouring, and I have seen far more serving each other in love. I see a lot more of viewing each other as neighbors, and that makes me so happy. I am happy that that particular part of Paul's lesson here, for the most part, does not really fit our situation. That is a good thing. That makes me so happy. I am so proud of you. I love you all so much. But we can always, always do better at living out our freedom by serving through love. And so, I want you to remember, you are all free. You are free from worrying about keeping the little rules and the regulations of the law, but you are not free to do whatever you want. You are free to serve. You are free to love. And that means loving your neighbor as yourself. Think of the cliche line, treat others how you want to be treated. It's a cliche because it works. Because it's been used so often. Treat others as well or as better than yourselves. Lower yourself and be a servant. Serve through love. Observe and meet people's needs. And this doesn't just mean your physical neighbor or people you like. It's everybody. There are loving feelings, but ultimately, especially scripturally, love is an action. When I was in Bible college in a counseling course, Dave Knutson shared something that has stuck with me for a decade. He said, marriages fail when the spouses don't feel in love, and so they stop acting in love. Marriage succeeds when you continue to do the action of love when there isn't the feeling of love, because eventually the feeling will come back if you keep doing the action. Love is an action. Agape, this serving love, is an action. It is trying to meet another person's needs and show them benevolence and serve. So even if you don't feel these loving, butterfly, happy feelings towards someone who you're told to consider your neighbor, do the action of love. Practice love by addressing issues in your neighborhood, like a garbage collection or safety issues. We just had a big windstorm. Some of us probably saw our neighbor's garbage can or trash blowing across the neighborhood or across people's yards, Show love. Go pick up that person's trash can, bring it to the side of their house, or help clear their yard of garbage that's blown there. Or in a world full of competition and stress, go up to a coworker and acknowledge their hard work. Say, hey, I see what you're doing, and I think you're doing a good job. I appreciate it. Or reach out to someone through email or social media and tell them you appreciate them. There are so many eerie practical ways to show this neighborly love. Maybe you're out in public and you see a single mom struggling with her kids and groceries and trying to handle it all, or an elderly person struggling with their shopping. Instead of looking away and thinking, I'm too busy, I don't want to get caught up in this, it's inconvenient. Well, guess what? Love is inconvenient. But in those moments, sometimes it has the biggest impact. Go over, ask if you can carry the groceries, or help with the kids, or something. Just, how can I help you? I see that you're having a hard time here. And you know what? My mom was a single mom in many ways because my dad was away so often. I know my brother and I were a handful in the grocery store, particularly me. But if someone had offered to help her, she would have been crying tears of joy, man. Like, it means a lot. Saying you love someone and then not actually showing it, it's kind of useless to them, right? Love needs to be an action. There's a reason people say actions speak louder than words. So rather than just going around and saying, I love my neighbor, I pray for them, that's great. Show it through your actions. Remember the Good Samaritan in closing. If he didn't just help the injured man, he changed that man's life forever. There is no way that man would ever think of Samaritans in the same way again. Sometimes it is so easy to overlook our neighbors, but little things like sharing a meal or checking in can lead to lasting relationships that can also lead to people's lives being changed as they meet Jesus. So go out today and remember that each act of kindness, each act of love shapes the world one neighbor at a time. And it is one of the best ways that we can show Jesus. So go out, live your freedom through love, and just love your neighbor as yourself.
Her last song is When We All Get to Heaven. April